We're going to begin this afternoon with a report of the Jurisdictional Study Committee. The chair recognizes the following persons to provide this report: Fred Brewington, Susan Brumbaugh, and Lonnie Chafin. Please welcome them as they come.
Good afternoon, General Conference. My name is Fred Brewington. I'm from the New York Annual Conference. I'm an African-American man. I'm straight, I'm laity, and I am an older, but try to catch me, member of the church. Susan?
I am Susan Brumbaugh from the New Mexico Annual Conference, and there's only one other of me, so if she cheers, I don't know that you'll hear it as much as your committee. And here's Lonnie.
Good morning, General Conference. Lonnie Chafin, laity, Northern Illinois Conference, white male.
Friends, together we will be presenting you with the Jurisdictional Study Report. Our full report can be found in Volume 3 of your ADCA on pages 1,268 to 1,274. In 2016, that being 2016, General Conference authorized the Jurisdictional Study Committee, or we refer to it as the JSC, comprising members of each of the 5 jurisdictions within the United States, to review legislation related to jurisdictional boundaries and the number of bishops within jurisdictions in order to make a recommendation to the 2020 General Conference. And of course, that's us now, constituted meeting in 2024. The stark realities of the worldwide pandemic, disaffiliations, church closures, and changes in budget realities have impacted the landscape for all of us. That altered landscape, however, opens a view that is panoramic in the consideration of options that present themselves as the people's called United Methodists enter a new and exciting paradigm. We know that the mission of the United Methodist Church is to, say it with me, make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And with that in front of us as our mission, we took the what of the United Methodist Church's mission and looked at the how do we get to the what. Our mission for the Jurisdictional Study Committee is the Jurisdictional Study Committee will examine the current realities and missional needs of the United Methodist Church for the 21st century and recommend and process to determine the number of boundaries of the jurisdictions and episcopal areas that align with the missional priorities and common purposes of the United Methodist Church, so that we live out the call of Christ as people committed to be in the connection. Hear these words: I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. As Isaiah writes those words, and we hear them knowing that we are not the same as we were in the past, the Jurisdictional Study Committee prayerfully extends the offerings that were provided to you and to the committees so that we could collectively find our way into God's calling us to be who we are now and who we are to be in the future. The work of the Jurisdictional Study Committee found its foundation in recognizing where we find ourselves going into this gathering of the General Conference of 2020, reconstituted as 2024. Embracing the challenges before us, we know that fresh approaches must be considered for all aspects of our structure, systems, and sustainability. So, this includes being open to accept what resources avail themselves as we grow into our spirit-led future. Who was it that did this work? Well, if you take a look at the membership screen that's up before you, the Jurisdictional Study Committee represents the diversity of the 5 jurisdictions. Each jurisdiction was represented by 1 clergy person, 1 lay person, and 1 bishop from each jurisdiction, all of whom nominated by their College of Bishops. The JSC members reviewed legislation and the present book of discipline and held in-depth conversations and jurisdictional discussions with leaders from each jurisdiction, the GCFA, and bishops. We concluded that continuing with 5 jurisdictions and the current boundaries is appropriate. We further concluded that membership formula that has been what we have been guided by in the past, that was used to determine the number of bishops within the United States, is no longer an accurate reflection of the leadership needs and mission within the jurisdictions. We are recommending that jurisdictions are in a better position to assess missionally the number of bishops to better reflect the missional, cultural, and contextual needs of the church today. Susan?
The current process is a straightforward formula based on membership. We should have that on the screen. First, that every jurisdiction should be entitled to a minimum of 5 bishops, funded by an apportionment to all jurisdictional annual conferences, and that there will be an additional bishop for every 300,000 members, also funded by an apportionment to all jurisdictional annual conference. Let's face it, membership is changing rapidly, and that formula is not serving us well. Our study committee is proposing that we end the use of membership to determine the number of funded bishops, and instead allow jurisdictions to consider the missional needs of their jurisdictions. Through conversation and discernment, we concluded that the number, assignment, focus, and support of United States bishops is best handled within the jurisdiction where people better understand the missional strengths and challenges and opportunities. The petition submitted by our study committee proposed that each jurisdiction will have 5 bishops funded by apportionment to annual conferences in all 5 jurisdictions. Each jurisdiction would then discern whether there is need for additional bishops beyond these 5. The salary and expenses of these additional bishops, other than travel, would be paid through apportionment to the annual conferences within the affected jurisdiction, rather than by apportionment to all annual conferences in the United States. The financial burden of one jurisdiction's decision to have additional bishops beyond the minimum should not financially affect the annual conferences in other jurisdictions. This is similar to the process that's used to determine the number of bishops in the central conferences. And over the last 2 years, as we have lived into the reality of an ever-diminishing Episcopal fund, our U.S. jurisdictions have already been having conversations about missional needs. So before I briefly explain the process, we want Fred, our resident attorney, to talk about a concern we've heard about our recommended changes.
So here's the question. Is this constitutional? Yes, it is. Our work took us to understand that it was necessary to do some of that research ahead of time. And the Constitution of the United Methodist Church establishes an interconnected set of authorities leading to the determination of the number of bishops authorized for election and assignment in the jurisdictional conferences. The Judicial Council has observed that, quote, the system balances and constrains and constrains the powers exercised by each of the authorities individually and by all connectionally. Colleges of bishops have authority to arrange the plan of episcopal supervision of the annual conferences, missionary conferences, and missions within their respective territories. So, jurisdictional conferences have authority to determine the number, names, and boundaries of the annual conferences and episcopal areas. You find that in paragraph 40. Colleges of bishops have authority to arrange the plan of episcopal supervision of the annual conferences, missionary conferences, and missions within their respective territories. And that's paragraph 48. General Conference has authority to fix a uniform basis upon which bishops shall be elected by the jurisdictional conferences. And you'll find that at paragraph 16.1010. And to determine and provide for raising and distributing funds necessary to carry on the work of the church. The Judicial Council has reasoned that the dual authority granted to General Conference determines how many bishops there will be in each jurisdiction. And that is found in decision 1312, or 1,312. Our legislative proposals, all of which have been dealt with now by the committees, attempted to take into account the tension created by these competing constitutional provisions in an effort to create a new process which allows the determination of the number of bishops in the jurisdictions to be based on missional needs rather than the strict mathematical formula that Susan spoke about. And in doing so, we shifting the financial responsibility for support of bishops beyond the minimum number directly to the jurisdictions. Susan?
Seeing that we don't have a lot of time left, I want to talk about a couple of things. One is that there are 5 petitions that are part of the Jurisdictional Study Committee's report, and 3 of them have already passed on the consent calendar. We have 2 that we are about to discuss that have financial implications, one on office expenses and one on the number of bishops. A concern I've heard is that our petition named that the number of bishops would be set on the current 2016 number, which of course is out of date. Our intention was to say that the number should be set by the Interjurisdictional Study Committee's recommendations, and they've all been working on that, and that this process would then be implemented over the next 4 years and be used really in the next General Conference. So I hope that that helps a little bit. I want Lonnie to talk a little bit, because we have a little bit more time, about some of the financial implications.
So how will the funding work? It's important to realize how little will change. GCFA will still apportion a single amount for the Episcopal Fund to all annual conferences. There won't be an apportionment for bishops from the jurisdiction and from GCFA. There will be one. We are not proposing that GCFA would continue the staffing relationship with bishops that they have currently. There would be no change in that. There wouldn't be jurisdictions paying for hiring some bishops and GCFA hiring other bishops. There will be no changes for Central Conference bishops, nor the Council of Bishops, nor the College of Bishops, nor the Ecumenical Office, nor retired bishops. There are only 2 key changes. The first change is around office expenses. Currently, the Episcopal Fund asks for money in the apportionment for the Episcopal Fund, GCFA asks for money to support office expenses for jurisdictional bishops, and then that money is paid back to the annual conferences in office support. This petition would end that back and forth, and that the costs that would shift from the Episcopal Fund and just remain with the annual conference. And the second piece is that if the jurisdiction decides for a 6th or 7th bishop beyond the minimum, the costs of that bishop would only be borne by the conferences in that jurisdiction, wrapped into the calculation of their Episcopal Fund apportionment and not spread across all annual conferences. So for example, if you think the costs of a jurisdictional bishop is $300,000 and the North Central jurisdiction decides to have a 6th bishop, that $300,000 would be apportioned only to the 10 conferences in the North Central jurisdiction.
So, Susan, what would you like the folks out there to do?
I would like us to move on to the next calendar item. That's what I would like us to do. We wanted to share some information to help you as you discern these next 2 items, and I hope that that was helpful. Thank you for your time.
Take a look at the petitions. Thank you so much.